All right, we're back. We're live. Another exciting AppliedMMT live stream ready for tonight. Adam, how you doing, my man? MMT has been debunked. Oh, man, all the work that we put into this over in the matter of a weekend, man. This is it's all done. It is all done. Or is it? Will we redeem ourselves over the course of the next hour or so and prove to ourselves and the millions of followers we have around the world that, in fact, MMT is not debunked? You're right, Derek. It's been a good run, man. It's been a good run. But it is over. It really was. We had a lot of fun. I made a ton of right calls that all have been disproven by a couple tweets over the weekend. Let's see. The anti-MMTers came out in droves this weekend and prior, and we've had some. I mean, in reality, I'm always glad whenever MMT can kind of take some time to explain kind of the view and the framework, and if that means having to deal with like the same straw man over and over and over and over again, so be it, because more and more people get a chance to kind of see and think through some of the things that MMT are saying. And in fact, Adam, one of the things we've been doing as just a business, and you kicked this off, is we've been having conversations with the members of AppliedMMT.com. And I'm not going to dox any of our members, but I can't tell you how many times our members are like, yeah, I used to be a professional economist and none of this stuff made sense to me. And then I stumbled across this YouTube channel of this guy, Doug, who's spouting off this MMT stuff, and it all made sense to me. And this is I mean, it's not like we have like thousands of members that we're interviewing. This is a consistent storyline in almost every one of these discussions that we're having with our members to try and figure out. We've got multiple tools that we're building out, and we just want to know. I mean, I know what's helpful to me, but I'm myself and not the customer and not what everyone else wants. So we're interviewing them to see what should we be focusing on. And this is a consistent thread of the subscribers we have, and I'm sure now of the people that are watching this stream, probably very similar, that consistently they have some sort of professional attachment to the macroeconomic world, and they never understood why things were happening the way that they were, and MMT came in. So I think my takeaway there is, in one sense, and Adam can attest to this. He's one part my counselor too. I'll come to him and I'm like, dude, Adam, this is just I keep having to have the same fight. This is the same really dumb takes over and over again that we have to keep debunking, and I'm getting exhausted. And with that being said, I think it's engaging with the takes that I think are demonstrably incorrect allows new people to say, yeah, I kind of had that take. I always didn't maybe like that take, but now that I see where you're coming from, it makes a lot of sense. Like, I always had this kind of lingering question over here, and you've been asking these things, and this helps. So I think in the long run, it does help, but it is it is a bit exhausting. So anyway. I can hear you loud and clear. Hopefully I didn't mute you. So I'm okay. I'm hearing Adam's muted. Adam is now unmuted, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize.
Oh, it was Doug's fault.
Oh no.
All good. Can you guys hear me now? Chat, can you hear me now? Okay. All right. Sounds like I'm back. So what I was saying was, part of me wonders because we know, like anecdotally, we've heard that some of the high profile mainstream economists will acknowledge that MMT is right publicly. I'm sorry, privately, but not publicly. And I'm wondering if the same is true of, these MMT critics on Twitter. Uh, they know that they can stir up conversation by making some point about MMT because they're going to get pro MMT people fighting back. They'll get anti MMT people piling on. And I wonder if, the MMT strawman people, the MMT critics, this isn't all of them, but I wonder if some of them do it just to stir up engagement on Twitter. I think that that's definitely a possibility. But, you never know. You never know who's being intellectually honest on Twitter and who's not.
And it does, to be fair, it does work. And I use the strategy myself.
Yeah.
I will purposely word things in a way that I know are not, the most charitable understanding of what's being said.
Right.
So,
Right.
but I'm fully convinced of my framework, and we've talked about this in the past too. I mean, if there's ever a situation where I realized, like, hey, I think MMT got this wrong, and it would benefit myself and certainly our user base to pivot to a better understanding that better explains the data that we're seeing. I'm gonna make that pivot, but to a certain extent, that is what MMT is anyway. I mean, it is
Right.
an amalgamation of multiple ideas in the Keynesian, post-Keynesian, heterodox school of economics, all brought together in one framework that just understands this idea of vertical money and horizontal money working together, amongst a few other things that Mosler put in on top of that, or at least kind of framed it on top of that, and that is what MMT is. I mean, I would say MMT is always able to adapt. Yep. In light of new evidence, and
right.
I think it absolutely would in light of new evidence. And the other thing too is in terms of just the straight up framework. I mean, the basic thing, net financial assets being added to the private sector when the government spends, like that. The fact that the currency is effectively a tax liability that you have to pay back. That drives the use of the currency. I mean, these sort of things are just to me bedrock theoretical statements that have been proven throughout the last 5,000 years. Anthropological evidence all points to that, the whole bit, and those seem like bedrock, kind of hard to disprove, just because they're accounting. Especially a lot of the points that MMT makes are just pure accounting identities. And
right.
You can debate back and forth the implication, but the accounting identities are what they are. Either way, and actually, I mean, I think this is one of the things that in my own 10 years of developing where I'm at, one of the things I think I've absolutely had to change is I really, really thought almost under any condition, higher rates would be potentially disinflationary, especially because they would diminish demand for lending. Even though I always had maybe a little like a pebble in the shoe that maybe I didn't fully understand this, but I mean that was one of the ways in which my own thinking had to evolve, and there was never anything in MMT that said nope, like higher rates will always cause a disinflationary reaction or contract lending, right. And we've been able to kind of see that in the data. So. That being said, let's go over some tweets. What do you think about that, man? Let's jump into some fun here. So the four biggies that came out this weekend started off with Lynn Alden. Very large presence in the macro world. MMT proponents often say that public sector deficit is a private sector surplus. Well, yeah, a surplus of money. That's why it's inflationary. Shrug emoji. It's not that we often say that. It's just that it's an accounting identity. But that aside, there were some really good responses to this. Stephanie Kelton, of course, bringing up Japan as an example. We'll get into this example in just a second. But then following that, Luke Groman jumps in on the mix. MMT also requires a robust domestic
industrial
base. Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Low sovereign debt, so rate hikes to fight inflation don't exacerbate it. Functioning domestic policy. Anyway,
This is the one that really bothered me, by the way.
Oh, yeah, we'll jump into this. Okay, so one of the things
Yeah.
I did, I'm not petty or anything, but sometimes I just
Yeah.
like to get an understanding of where I'm at. Again, I'm not petty. I don't ever like point back to my track record and then look up other people's track record and see. But I just needed to see where he was at in 2022, and he's been like making this claim as like this is why the recession was going to be so bad in 2023 because of
Right.
these 3 points.
Right.
So I found a little bit of that. Again, I don't like to pull this stuff up. But if you twist my arm, I might be willing to pull up some of their former tweets. Next up, we have then Bob Murphy coming in, and his point. I kind of agree. I kind of agree with Bob's point here to a certain extent, in the point that we're all kind of debating amongst ourselves. But 2 weeks ago, when the surprising inflation number came out, Stephanie Kelton made sure to credit MMT for teaching the government money boosts prices and forget about interest rates today. Lynn Alden says effectively the infusion of government boosts prices, and then Stephanie, how do you put it here? Her flying monkeys are shocked at the economic ignorance. Okay. So to a certain extent, I get his point. We'll jump back to that, and then just finally, me doing my own form of engagement farming, which is now apparently not allowed on Twitter, going after Per Byland, my favorite guy, talking about building AI models that implement praxeology, which I gotta, you know what? I might actually reach out to him. I did actually publicly reach out to him. And by the way, Per, if you're watching this, let me know, drop a DM real quick. I will absolutely have you on right now. We can completely change course for the stream and go over some of the AI and the code stuff. But my point is just do it, man. Just build the model, put in the work, shut up, put up or shut up sort of thing. And then with that being said, the reason I'm bringing this up is some really good discussion followed from this. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's start off with the Lynn Alden tweet, and I guess I'll get your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Out of the gate.
So, sure. So I think, and this is kind of what I think a lot of MMT critics suffer from. It's similar to the rate hike thing, right? It's like the mainstream says, raising rates will slow the economy, will be disinflationary, as if it's just a law of nature that, that there's like an off switch for demand, and that off switch is raising rates. And it's kind of the same thing here, where she's saying that, she identifies the accounting identity that MMT, that is at the heart of MMT, which is the public deficit, is the private sector surplus. But she kind of takes that word and surplus and abuses it. Just because there's a surplus of money doesn't mean it's necessarily inflationary. So we can see that, just because the government's running a deficit and the private sector, as a result, is accruing a surplus, that doesn't mean it's always inflationary. And if you look at the data, I think Dirk Entz actually quote tweeted this and pulled in some graphs. But a deficit is not inherently inflationary. A private sector surplus is not inherently inflationary. And that's, to me, this is just like a straw man tweet, and I think she probably knows it. It's just, it's you can't say that a private sector surplus is automatically inflationary.
So she went on to later define what she meant by inflationary, and I think she said something to the extent of, and I could be wrong, but she said something to the extent of like what she meant by inflationary is that had deficit spending not been there all along, we would have had a less inflationary outcome or something like that. And to
like post pandemic, you mean?
Post pandemic, and then some other examples come out. I didn't read like every subpath of the tweet and everything like that. So you're absolutely right. I mean, it's not that like we often say it is just an accounting identity. And the point that I made is, and I think where the hard money, where at least I used to be in this camp, and then so I completely diverge from the hard money people here, and I think I realized the error of my ways, and I'll bring up my response here, in that I think they define money creation as inflation, or they define inflation as money creation, and they see an identity there, right? Just like we would see an identity of government spending being an additional, like a surplus for the private sector. They see and understand any government money printing is inherently inflationary, and and so if you have that identity, then I agree that yes, all government spending is inflationary because you're just creating an identity there, right?
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, yeah, the reason the S&P 500 went from 666 on whatever March 23rd, 2009, whatever the bottom was in 2009, maybe it was 2010, whenever the bottom was in the S&P in 2009, 2010 to where it is today, just above 5,000. That if it got there, and you could say it inflated to that point because of government spending. That's not. I'm not going to debate that point. And if you don't like that, that is just an ideological point at that juncture, right? Like, and to me, this is always the biggest problem with this whole discussion. Is I am well aware when I'm putting on my ideological political cap, my policy cap, and I'm well aware of when I'm putting on my macro assessment cap. And a lot of people in this space interchange caps mid-thought without recognizing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I'm fine. Now, this just isn't what we do. I don't mind having the inflation debates. I don't mind putting on the ideological cap from time to time, but it's moderately uninteresting to me. What I want to know is the S&P 500 went from 666 in 2009 to 5,000 today, peaking at almost 5,200. From that perspective, if you want to discuss the ideological impacts or the policy impacts, did our economy get better? Is there a more equitable share of that growth? Are our lives better off, right?
Right.
And what policies caused our lives to be better off or not better off?
Mm-hmm.
But the simple fact that growth that gets accounted for, the financial accounting of that growth, is really what I like. It's the financial flow of that growth that I actually care about, because that's the only thing I can take advantage of from an investment standpoint. I can't take an advantage of people's feelings about inflation. I can only take advantage of prices going higher or lower. And and to me, it's a waste of breath. It's not a waste of breath. It's a worthwhile discussion to have. But to me, it is it's an irrelevant discussion to the mechanics of monetary fiscal policy as they interact with the financial sector. And so that being said, to me, this is the genius of what we've figured out here, and what MMT figured out, and certainly what an applied MMT approach has figured out, that instead of demanding, because you have to realize too, if you're asking for there to not be government spending, for there not to be inflation, you're actually asking big government. You're which is quite ironic that the small government hard money types are now going to step in and say, "Hey, big government, we want you to stop money creation because money creation is inflationary." And when you look at money creation from a sectoral balance approach, from an accounting identity, that means you're literally telling, "Hey, big government, please come in and stop new investment because we don't want new money being created."
Right.
Which is definitionally inflationary from their own construct. And I'm sure I'm strawmanning them a bit, but whatever. I mean, I'm trying to, if they want to come on and critique my, hopefully I'm not strawmanning them. Hopefully I'm steelmanning them. But if they want to critique how they understand government printing, then, in terms of how they would define inflation and government printing, that's fine. They can give their own critique. But as I see it, that's what they need. So what they're literally asking is, "Hey, big government, we want you to stop money creation." Because even bank credit, even private money creation, still then adds more money into the private sector. It would that is still then definitionally inflationary. You can't have investment without new money creation. So that is, I think that's really my big thing. One, there's a bit of an irony there to me because they are really the big government people demanding big government step in and pick the winner and loser, right?
Right.
They want the winner to be gold or whatever it is that they want to back the currency, and they want the loser to be anyone who would want to invest and see growth. Now, obviously, they don't fully see that because they've never actually pulled out pen and paper and gone through the T accounts and understood the flows. I mean, if they would, they'd be MMTers. So I'm not holding their fully holding their ignorance from against them, but. If they did realize that and they still want it and they call themselves small government, Austrian, whatever types, it's, to me, it's contradictory. So that was kind of my thought. There was one follow-up tweet that I thought was just a great example of this because a lot of people didn't understand what I was saying, and this is one of like the truisms that Moser tweets out that saving is the accounting identity of investment, right? And I thought it was a great analogy by Derek. We've had him on the podcast about a month or two ago. Just a really brilliant thinker. Technically, cannot invest without some form of financial asset creation because an expenditure without accounting for where the value goes is not an investment by definition. Even squirrels remember where they stashed nuts. That record is the thing that becomes the financial asset. I thought that was brilliant. That was really great. That was a great analogy. So I really appreciated that. And to drive this point home even more, and then I'll give you a chance to fill in the gaps here. To drive that home even more, and this is kind of connect that point. The whole idea is that financial assets are just the accounting record of economic activity, right?
Right.
And I absolutely agree and understand that economic activity from a policy or an ideological standpoint is far more important than the financial world.
Yeah.
But I make my money from understanding what's happening in financial markets. And MMT is an explainer of how to understand the financial accounting of the economy. And so that is what MMT is. And it is the proper and correct understanding of that.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else misconstrues something of the accounting record in one way or another, which then misinforms potential policy or trade or investment decisions that you would make on out.
Right.
So that was kind of my response. It went over most people's heads. I kind of just had to give up on it and decided Twitter wasn't going to be the place to explain what's actually going on. But I feel like savings is the accounting record of investment is probably the best way to put it if that's not exactly clicking for you, and why I can say what I said in response. I don't know where the tweet was. I've got too many tabs open now. I'm realizing. There we go. Why I can say that instead of demanding that big government step in and stop investment, we simply follow the flows and realize where the resulting growth is. Give me your thoughts, man.
I think that's extremely well said. I also think like this idea, and I think it all stems from the quantity theory of money, right? Like the more money the more money that is out there, the higher the price level will be. And I think. I believe it was Randy Ray that said this. I think it was in his most recent book, actually. The thing is, and before I get into the Ray thing, if you think about if the government were to create $1 trillion in cash and send it to space, that's not going to cause inflation, right? So you can't only look at the quantity of money. You have to look at how what is actually happening with that money. And I think that's what you're saying. So what Ray says is it's not it's not the creation of dollars that can be inflationary or is inflationary. It's the spending of those dollars that can cause inflation, right? And those are two different things. Depends what happens when the dollar is spent into existence that may have inflationary pressures. And to me, this is just another example of MMT looking into taking a more nuanced approach to the economy than most macro people, right? Because this idea that money creation is necessarily inflationary is not true. Looking back at the data, it's not true. And just and this is why I brought up the rate hikes thing before. The mainstream has this idea that hiking rates slows down the economy, and MMT is saying Actually, not necessarily. And in fact, you may have it backwards, right? Like you may have it backwards. We're not saying it must be this way, it must be this way. And I think that very narrow-minded approach to economics is why the approach tends to be so bad. And it's like it has horrible predictive power. So I don't know, man. I every day I'm kind of amazed at how narrow-minded the non-MMTers are. But I digress.
I'm in agreement. All right, we got a couple questions coming in on that one that I think is probably worth bringing up real quick. Also, thanks for the super chats, Ty. Funds for going in on strange tweets towards Pear Fund for trauma counseling. I will forward that donation to Pear. All right, we got define inflation. I mean, there are multiple kinds of inflation. It just you can define inflation however you want. I don't, again, Charles, I know this is just going to piss you off. I know this, but it's just such an uninteresting question to me. I mean, the thing you don't want is hit to production and supply that makes things difficult to get. I mean, it makes the goods and services that used to be there not available and still have the same amount of money chasing those goods. I mean, that is no fun. The kinds of inflation that are absolutely terrible are the kinds of inflation where at the policy level they jack rates up, borrow money in a currency that they don't actually get to create, and then pay off the debt that they owe in the currency that they don't have the ability to create by issuing the currency they do have the ability to create and funding the debt via that. I mean, that is inflationary. So I'm fine just taking the CPI as the measure of inflation. That's fine. More importantly, you tell me how you define inflation, then we can discuss the pros and cons and the implications of that on financial markets from there.
I would also point Charles to Mosler's talk. I can send you a link to it, Doug. Okay. I'll send you a link and you can put it in chat if you want.
It'll let me post it in chat. The other thing too, on this point, I want to go on this as well. The other thing too on this point regarding inflation, government spending is, generally speaking, I don't, and this is now me putting on my cap from a policy perspective, you shouldn't encourage, it should be a policy to encourage hoarding of the government tax liability. That just shouldn't be the policy. The policy should always be to encourage investment. And if that is the policy, to encourage investment, then that means there's never going to want to be the desire to hoard the unit of account that is being used to track that investment, right? And in other words, assets should be inflationary, and there should be a desire to invest in those assets that are going up in price, because that creates economic activity, growth, all that good sort of stuff. And if the unit of account is in and of itself deflationary, such as like Bitcoin is by its nature, then that encourages hoarding of that and not using that for economic activity. So, I mean, the measure of Bitcoin's worth or some other alternative would be how much economic activity is it facilitating, and then how much, I don't even know how you do this in a Bitcoin world, but essentially how much more Bitcoin is being created endogenously, if that's even a thing. I mean, it's probably not, but the point being is inflation's good if the outcome of that inflation is overall prosperity and economic growth, which in the U.S. I would say over the last 100 years, that's exactly what we've gotten. Has it been perfect? No. I mean, Am I giving a pass to everything that's happened in the U.S. policy-wise over the last 100 years? No. But the inflation we've had in the U.S. has been phenomenal. The inflation that has happened in countries like Venezuela or Argentina, which are doing exactly the things that any MMT proponent would say don't do, that's not been good. All right. You sent me that link. I will copy said link and put that in chat. Yeah, this is a really good discussion on this front. Chat, we'll get back. Just as a reminder, if you do have a question, make sure you put question in the chat or at me, and I'll get back to them. All right, next up, we will move forward to the next chat of the day, and that was Luke Groman's. MMT also requires a robust domestic industrial base, low sovereign debt, and functioning domestic politics. Adam, you wrote a response to this.
I did.
I'll let you go for it, man.
I did. So my response to this was, first of all, this is nonsensical. My response to this was basically like, I think I said, this is akin to saying sabermetrics, which if you're not familiar with sabermetrics, it's kind of like the empirical analysis of baseball data, right? And I said, this is like saying sabermetrics requires lots of home runs, right? Which is obviously not the case. You can do sabermetrics, you can analyze baseball statistics and data without, the players behaving in a certain way. So this idea that MMT doesn't require anything. MMT is kind of just a framework for analysis, right? So we can analyze countries that don't have a robust domestic industrial base. We can analyze countries that have a high sovereign debt level. We can analyze, dysfunctional domestic policies through this MMT lens and come up with, our predictions for their economies. We can come up with policy recommendations for them, all via the MMT framework. So my sense is that he doesn't fully understand MMT. It kind of bothered me too, because he quoted Mosler as if Mosler was corroborating his view, and he wasn't. I think he took a Mosler tweet out of context if you go further down the thread. I think, there you go. Yeah. As MMT expert Warren Mosler warned a year ago regarding calls for higher for longer to fight inflation. Don't laugh, we're next. I think this was kind of out of context. Mosler is saying this, using his framework, the MMT framework, to kind of warn that the Fed's rate hikes are going to make things worse. That doesn't mean MMT requires, low sovereign debt levels or whatever. We're just saying these are the implications with high sovereign debt levels that it will likely make inflation worse. So this tweet really bothered me. I think he totally, mischaracterized MMT.
Yeah. I'm finally, I didn't pay too much attention to this thread up until right now. I finally get where he doesn't get what Warren Mosler obviously gets. So this is just hitting me right now. What it is that you're saying. Yeah. So this stuff is just way over Luke's head, and not over his head. It just hasn't clicked. So yeah, that's helpful. Let me go over these again. A robust domestic industrial base to respond to inflation. It's not that MMT requires it. I'm going to go over these again. And then you probably just said that. I was fixing your audio. So maybe you already said this. A robust domestic industrial base is a good thing.
Yeah.
I don't.
Real resources are a good thing.
Yes. I think people think that MMT just means print lots of money to make it go away.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 100%.
Which is still better than not printing any money. Anyway, I mean, at least printing a lot of money means you have likely low unemployment, assuming that money is, well, I guess you could make that. Never mind. I'm gonna retract that and say I could see a way in which they can still print a ton of money and still have high unemployment. So yeah, you're absolutely right, and we found this out in 2021 that when we had supply chain shocks and we couldn't import the things that we had normally imported, that we got inflation CPI inflation because we couldn't produce the stuff that we normally did domestically, and we couldn't import it, and so therefore you get inflation. 100% exactly what you would expect in an MMT framework. No disagreement there, but it doesn't require it. MMT absolutely has the capacity to understand what would happen if the government went crazy. I mean, to a certain extent, I have no problem admitting and saying and arguing that the stimmy checks that went out in 2020 and 2021 exacerbated the inflation that we had as measured by CPI. No problem there. Like,
It goes back to that Levy Institute paper written by Ray and Narisian. I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but right at the beginning of the pandemic, they wrote a paper with a few policy proposals based on the MMT framework. And they actually quoted Jason Furman, and Furman was saying, we need to, he was recommending stimulus checks. And Ray actually responded in the paper and he said, the problem is not going to be a demand issue. It's going to be a supply issue because people aren't going to be reporting to their jobs in factories, et cetera. And he literally says, he was like, I wouldn't subsidize demand because what are people going to buy other than $75 bottles of hand sanitizer? So like that is the MMT framework, right?
Yeah.
So MMT does, this idea that it requires a domestic industrial base, it's just, no.
Charles, I see you popping in here saying that Stephanie Kelton agrees, but she would never agree that MMT requires something. MMT is a framework for analysis. It's your sabermetrics example, now that I get it, is really good. This stuff works regardless. It's a framework. It's a framework for analysis. I mean, I don't know any way I can say it. If you don't
go ahead, Doug.
No. You're good. You're good.
I was going to say, so there are several MMT academics who focus on developing nations, right? So these are countries without domestic industrial bases, and they make policy recommendations based on the fact that they don't have robust domestic industrial bases, and they use MMT as a framework to inform policy. So MMT does not require, going back, it's a framework for analysis.
Yep. And I can tell you exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, we will tell you that if you do what you're doing in Argentina and Venezuela and any other country, Turkey and whatnot, that you're going to get runaway inflation. 100% going to happen. That is part of the framework for analysis. And to Moser's point, we're going to be there. We're actually going to be there.
Right.
If the Fed sticks to what it is that they're saying, which at this point, where are we at with the CME? Give me 1 second to pull this up real quick.
I'm pretty sure that the consensus is that the Fed's going to hold through 24.
Through the remainder of the year now is consensus? Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you remember when it was a race to March?
Yeah.
A race to March.
Yeah, it feels like it wasn't long ago.
It wasn't too long ago. All right, we got June, 85%, so no cut by June. Very unlikely now. Where do we got July? No cut by July, so July is already now folded. I wonder if September is no cut. Okay, still pricing in a cut by September at this point. I'm gonna go to historical for June. I kind of want to see the historical. Okay, so it was the Wednesday. CPI comes out on Wednesday. That must have been a CPI print that pushed the June flip over.
Yeah.
Okay. Either way, and if just for the record, if you watch the history of all these and you go back to the historical, going back to March, January, March, May, June, you'll see this exact same pattern play out every single time, where it was well, I mean, it's exactly like let's see. it's exactly like September's looking right now. There's like this 30 to 40% chance of no cut, and then big surprise, better than expected inflation or whatever. GDP growth is 2% higher than we thought it was going to be, or something crazy like that. And then bam, you just get this big explosion of probability of no cut. And at this point, it's almost inevitable. I think this is exactly what Moser was trying to say. It's almost inevitable that we're going to end up in this spiral upwards of the Fed thinking they have to hike rates to kill the momentum that this inflation is having. I mean, and I think he's right. I mean, I'm moderately sympathetic to the view that Bill Wabuffo has on Twitter, and his view is that we are so productive right now that growth is just happening so fast, production is coming online so fast that it's going to be hard to get inflation. And I'm very sympathetic to that view, that we might just be running hot enough from a growth standpoint that we're just able to always absorb the new demand that's coming from this kind of trickle-down economic thing. But maybe we're not.
Well, I mean, you know what's actually interesting about that, and this is more into like the micro, is I think so. I haven't really looked a ton into the data, but just based on like tweets I've seen and headlines I've seen, I think a lot of what's driving inflation is rent. So like, and that's not like what's happening in the housing market. It's obvious to me what's going on. It's like, everyone with a low mortgage doesn't want to sell. Housing prices are going up. Rates are really high, so it's tough to afford a home. So there are a lot of people who are renting who would be buying. So that makes sense to me that the rental market is still a problem. Also exacerbated by the Fed rate hikes. And then I think car insurance is another one. So the thinking there is that people are buying cars that are more expensive, more complicated to make and repair, and that is driving up insurance premiums. And that's kind of like another thing where it's like, people have money to spend now. They're putting that money, maybe instead of buying a house, they're just buying a really nice car. And in order to insure that really nice car, their premium is really high, right? So, and we would have to look into this, but in my mind, like, it is the Fed that's exacerbating the inflation in both those cases. So we'll see how it plays out, but I don't think they're going to change their policy position on raising rates anytime soon.
Ghost in the Half Shell had a good question about can the Fed force a condition where they cut rates here? I don't think they will. Biden's come out and said we'll get some rate cuts in. It's kind of interesting too, because there is it's very clear that the high rate hikes are certainly felt at the bottom 50% of income earners the most, and both parties are going to want that vote come November. And so Biden already come out and said, yeah, they're going to cut at least once, and it makes me wonder what sort of political pressure the Fed is under to go ahead and feel the need to do something. Now, my question, my thought is, if they do a 25 basis point cut, they ain't gonna do anything. It's not like it's going to substantially change. Like, oh man, yeah, we couldn't afford that mortgage payment, but now we can after one cut from the Fed, right? I mean, it'd have to go back to 0% interest rates for that to be any sort of substantial change. And I'm not even convinced that, given the progress that we're on, given the fact that we're just kicking off this bank credit cycle, that the Fed won't then 3 months later reverse course anyway and start hiking again. Right. So I don't see any substantial change in the pathway to higher rate hikes into the future based on the Fed maybe changing course. They could though. That is certainly something that is outside any of our models to understand. I mean, it's up to the Fed. Go ahead. I think what you just described would be the worst case scenario for the Fed, where if they cut and then they felt like they made a mistake, could they, that's the situation that they want to avoid, right? Like, they don't want to quote unquote lose credibility. To me, my bet would be that they keep it steady.
because they can't reverse course twice. I feel like that would be the worst case scenario for them.
This is kind of okay. This is a good point. game theory, optimal Fed policy here.
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. If they cut, and 3 months later they have to hike again, and they cut in, let's say they cut in September. Yeah, let's say September is the cut. So you're 2 months out from the election, and then January 1st rolls around, or whatever the Fed date would be, 2025.
Yeah,
and they're like, yeah, we're gonna hike.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
I feel like that is the least likely outcome.
MAGA, rightfully so, would be on Twitter, losing their ever blinking minds off of something like that. Like the Fed was in cahoots to get Biden another 4 years, deep state, yada yada yada. Okay, I'm convinced that rates stay flat through the end of the year. Actually, I actually, if anything, maybe one hike post-election could be possible. Maybe a December, or I guess the November. Is there a November? No, there's a November and a December meeting. November 7th. When's election day this year? What? Can you look that up real quick? It's got to be close, right?
It is November.
Would it be the 6th?
It might be.
That would be hilarious if FOMC
it's
did.
November 5th.
November 5th. And then the rate cut decision would come in. So election day is on a Tuesday. For some reason, I thought the FOMC decision was on a Wednesday. Okay, that is hilarious that they could come in 2 days after the election and make a rate hike at that point. All right, that's my call. December, we get a hike. That's my call. We'll see. Might have to delete that. Just kidding. All right. That was a really good question. Let's move on next up to Bob Murphy's follow-up. Two weeks ago, when the surprising inflation number came out, Stephanie Kelton made sure to credit the MMT for teaching us that infusions of government money boost prices. Forget about interest rates. Today, Lynn Alden says that infusions of government money boost prices. Stephanie and her flying monkeys are shocked at the economic ignorance. And then I step in. I appreciate being added to this list, Bob. Looking out for a fellow content creator. I think we kind of beat this horse already a few times around. I think there's a few. We're kind of speaking past inflation and the way inflation is used, and kind of bad inflation and what I would say would be good inflation. But I don't know if you have any other thoughts on Bob's trolling here. Trolling in the good way. I appreciate this sort of trolling. So
yeah, it kind of goes back to the same point for me. That's, this assumption that infusions of government money, must boost prices. Like we can see plenty of years where the government was running a deficit and there was not CPI, elevated CPI. I don't know. I think same points from my side as the Lynn tweet.
Yeah, if you stumbled across this stream and you're not fully indoctrinated into MMT, I would say the period that you want to take a look at that is probably most instructive, that I think really proves the MMT point when it comes to interest rates, is going to be the post-Great Financial Period. I'm going to go ahead and pull up CPI here, and we will flip this to year-over-year change. And if you just look at the ebbs and flows of CPI, and I don't know, maybe I don't know how I could code this for it to look kind of the way that I'm seeing it. But without a doubt, the most tame inflation was really, you have to go back to the 1960s to get anywhere close, and by tame I just mean the constraint within which inflation stayed is the post-Great Financial Crisis period. And that happened during ZIRP, during
Yep.
the 0%, the zero rates, and during QE, right? And so if you're new to the MMT argument, we explain this. We explain the lack of inflation during that time is the fact that 0% interest rates are inherently disinflationary. And that's why a lot of MMT proponents, Mosler himself, are like, hey, we should have 0% interest rates. Like it really, if if you're going to use fiscal to conduct economic policy, it should be fiscal that is direct spending from Congress. It should not be fiscal that gets determined by monetary policy, right? Because we're literally blowing $1 trillion a year on interest rates, which is it's not even, spending's not even being voted on by the public in any way. I mean, it's just being sent out there and then trickled down. Now, here's the thing. So a lot of MMT proponents make that argument, but you can still be an MMTer and make the other side of the argument, right? I mean, you could say, even in this situation, no, I think higher interest rates are good. It actually probably, Ozzy, just saw that pop up. Really good point. No inflation in Japan as well for 30 years, and they had ZIRP for that entire time. So you can make the argument, that no, actually, the private sector is better off. People are better off with high interest rates. Like, it's good that there's always this, the bottom 50% can't get loans for mortgages and so forth. Like, you could make that argument and say that it has some sort of social benefit. You can make the argument the other way that no, there's no social benefit here. Let's go with 0% interest rates. Maybe you could say that more innovation happens with high interest rates and that it's worth whatever pain high interest rates might cause. But the point is, the framework for analysis remains the same. High interest rates generally going to lead to a more inflationary bent for the economy. It's going to make things more expensive. It's going to be adding more interest income to the private sector. That's going to be fiscal space that can't be used via policy from Congress to implement their policy. But it's going to be an injection in the private sector. Maybe there's a benefit, or you just use that policy space as policy space, and that's going to be dictated again by Congress and policymakers. So you can have the debate either direction. You can still have whatever ideological hat on that you want. You're still using the same framework for analysis.
Yep. Yeah, totally. Yeah, very well said. Doug, I sent you a tweet that Dirk Entz, I think it's a Fred graph of CPI, along with, and he added the public deficits or surplus to it that I think is useful.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I see what he's saying. Okay. MMT is such a useful theory because it is rooted in reality. Whether public deficit, private surpluses are inflationary is an empirical question, not a theoretical question. Sorry, Pear. Theory explains reality. MMT is an empirical theory, while almost all others are mere assumptions. Amen, brother. Amen. So he's showing... Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go. You go ahead.
I'm trying to see what he's showing. He's showing the surplus and deficit that's going on. Oh, he's just simply saying that government spending is inherently inflationary.
Yes.
From a CPI measure. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know who's actually proven that out? Go ahead. You know who's actually proven that out statistically and mathematically? But go ahead.
Is it the MMT macro trader?
It is. It is. Yeah. Yeah. He's actually proven this out and shown the work. So if you're interested in seeing how you can see that you actually can't see that in the data, then you can check that out. But again, I don't want to be. What I don't want to say is that it's not possible for that to take place. It is very possible for the government to spend a lot of money and it be inflationary if you change certain factors. And this could look entirely different, but it's not inherently, because we have massive lengths of time period where it didn't play out that way, and is very clear that deficits were not causing inflation during that time frame. I'll shut up. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say the recency bias in, with inflation, with all the inflation talk. It's like we literally, like, pre-COVID, we just had this 12-year period where everyone in macro was talking about, why can't we get inflation? We're running persistent budget deficits. We can't get inflation. And governments around the world can't get inflation. We have zero interest rates policy. Why is there no inflation? Then we have like this crazy supply shock. We have COVID disrupts everything. We get inflation. And like that entire decade is just forgotten about. I mean, I've seen Austrians blaming the QE post 2008 for today's inflation, which is amazing. But this like short termism it's kind of mind blowing.
It's finally happening.
My prediction, it's finally true 12 years later.
God, this was I had to give credit to this meme.
I didn't see this one.
If this is you, call it out. It's like I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I will get Fiat something is the name on Twitter.
The Fiat money guy. Yeah. He does good memes.
This was absolutely great. The Austrian switcheroo. The nature of money is such that I predict hyperinflation. No hyperinflation, but you can't test my theory. It's praxeology, true by construction. I'm just theorizing. Assume money comes from seashells or such, which would make it work like a commodity, not an IOU. No record of that. It doesn't matter. It could have been like that, from which it follows. But the nature of money is such that I predict hyperinflation. Oh, my God. Oh, all right. We're coming up on the end here, so I just got to dunk on Pear for a while. The other thing, too, some really good questions came out of this that are worth answering, that certainly points back to the work that we're doing. And for those of you who've been hanging around or just tuning in to the stream, maybe this is exactly what you're looking for in terms of, what the heck is actually going on with some of these models that we're building. But Pear and I have been going back to begin with. So this is kind of picking up on already some misunderstanding of, they are so allergic to any sort of like empirical observations whatsoever. I can't get them to even engage on this. Bob and I had been having a back and forth, and I'm just like, this is where the conversation ended. And I would love for this answer, because I know what my answer is. But what could you observe?
Yeah,
that would change your mind?
Mm-hmm.
What could you observe that would prove your position incorrect? Yeah, and
you'd think QE would have done it.
Yeah. If my question is, how do I put this? I guess my question is there any part of your argument that's falsifiable?
Right.
And if your argument is only falsifiable by showing logically that, your premise doesn't follow the conclusion, whatever, you're right. I will never be able to disprove you. And I mean, especially like a guy like Pear, who is, I mean, the guy is an academic, right? I mean, he works for a public institution as a professor. He's an academic. He's not like working in the real world like the rest of us, who actually have to make a product and sell it and to generate business activity. He can just sit and read his. I hope you're enjoying these digs. The irony. I hope you enjoy the irony here. The socialist MMT guy actually enjoys the free market because it allows him to profit off of his hard work, while the limited government Austrian guy sits in his academic ivory tower and tells MMTer that he doesn't understand logic well enough, which is true. I don't disagree, man. He throws around all these Latin logic terms and I've got to go Google it. I'm like, I don't just tell it to me. Like I'm a normal person that hasn't spent the last 20 years in academia, please. You're right, man. You're right. You know what? Like every other millennial, my vocabulary has been stunted from the use of autocomplete and texting. Okay. You got me, man. You got me. All right. Rant over. The irony is funny to me. Maybe it's not funny to you guys. All right. So his point was imagine an AI engine that could implement praxeology, which is their logical framework. As a framework for understanding, it would have the ability to assess the appropriateness of data, tell what is true and what is false, and judge what is most likely to be true, and thus blow all other AI out of the water. Is there? Okay, that's all he has. Show thread. Here's my point, man. Just do it. Just like build it. And this is the difference between this is what every MMT. I mean, you just sent me a tweet from Dirk Entz, right? And I know like Blair. I'm forgetting his Blair. What's his last name? Fix. Is that it? I mean, all of these MMTers, in one capacity or another, are building out the empirical models, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know we're the first in the deep learning space that are doing this, but in the deep learning space, we're doing it. Steve Keen, Ty Keen's in the systems dynamics space, building out incredible tools that validates their theories. And I'm sure, as just like I have, as I'm building out these models, it's going to allow me to update my understanding of how the world works, and I'm going to have changes in the way that things work, right?
Right.
Because the data demands it. Just build this out. This is what he's actually asking is not terribly hard. Now I know he's going to come in and say, praxeology, yada yada, cannot be programmed into a system. But you can look. There is agent-based modeling. If you want to understand human behavior, you can build agent-based models. Right.
Yep.
There are ways. Large language models are not my expertise at all, but I understand there are ways you can build large language models that have certain assumptions built into them. You can start building this stuff. You can start modeling this stuff. Just do it. Maybe they're onto something, right? Maybe they're right. Maybe before 5,000 years, prior to the first record we have, the first accounting record we have that shows that money has always been a debt-based system. Maybe they're right. Right, and maybe they have some insights that would be very valuable. I'm actually sure they would. I think there's some of the Austrian things that I remember most, the most, are some of the behavioral elements to it. I think there's something to that. So build this stuff out. It would actually be helpful for the entirety of the economic community to do it, and it isn't that hard. Once again, this is the difference between what we're doing and anyone else is doing. Instead of just claiming that our theory is great, and then if you built some sort of model that, let me just actually read the tweet, because I think I wrote it better than I'm trying to say it right now. Instead of just claiming that our model is great, we built MMT-informed deep learning neural networks to prove it. Austrians claim their AI models would be great, but which they think would then prove their theory. Now, I know that's not what he was actually saying. He wasn't saying that just because I could build a model that would be great, it would prove my theory. I get that. It's just, come on, it's Twitter. I gotta farm a little engagement. But still, the point being is just build the damn thing. Just build the damn thing. And then I did post a couple examples of that. I was hoping that the one on top would be the one that went first. The first one is the deep MMT, which I posted this just the other day before the close last week, or actually the beginning of last week when we were still kind of close to new all-time highs. Very interesting that deep MMT, and this is, let me just pull this up here. Very interesting that deep MMT was looking for a massive fall off by the end of the week. And I think I even indicated in the tweet that this seemed a little extreme, but lo and behold, we had a massive fall off by the end of the week. So Doug 0, deep MMT 1 at this point. It's probably more like Doug 0, deep MMT 20 at this point. But what a call by our simple trading bot is eventually what he called it, or something like that. I think, what did he call it? I'm not sure it's irrelevant. For most others, it looks like a simple bot just claimed to have built an AI. And then this is actually where the questions kind of came in from this point forward. So we can go over some of those questions. 'Cause I did think fiat money. Yeah, that's who made the tweet. That's who made the tweet.
He's strong with the memes.
That was a good meme. So I'm gonna jump to another screen in just a second here. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts, real quick, and then I can go on to the next point. Any other thoughts?
I don't think so. I'll say that I never, fully dove into the whole Austrian thing. I was just skeptical of the whole, the whole gold standard thing from the get-go. So I have not given it a fair shot, admittedly, but though it does seem like very faith-based to me, like all of their arguments. And that, I don't know. It seems, it seems anti-academic almost.
Yes. Yeah. How would you? I mean, to be completely honest, I wouldn't mind having a frank. Maybe Bob Murphy and I can have this discussion next time we chat. But yeah. I really am curious how they do their own peer-reviewed stuff, right?
Right.
Right. How does that process work?
Right.
From their framework. So I found the tweet that I wanted to. I thought these were good questions. I finally just kind of give up on the thread because I just can't explain all of this in Twitter. But how is it being the model? How is it MMT informed? In your YouTube videos where you explain your applied MMT approach, a lot of what you said is well known in economic for decades. 100% agree. I mean, MMT is not saying too much new. The currency is a tax liability, and then also the issuance of treasuries for a reserve drain are probably the two things that are new that Moser came up that are quite unique. But other than that, MMT is just a rearranging of the furniture in the superstructure that is macroeconomics. So I don't disagree. So good question. What I'm going to do is just read through the questions and then kind of go over what we've done to try and explain what it is that we actually did with our deep learning models in a hope to kind of explain what this actually is and what it isn't, and how you would even go about doing something like that. So the point is, what it means to be an informed model would be that you've engineered your features, so that's going to be your inputs, into a theory, and then you've built the model itself to fit the constraints of that theory or to best interpret the input of that data, and that you're embedding your theory into the way that you construct this, model. Something that would be a little bit more, for this to make sense, like large language models kind of do this, right? They built a certain theory out of how language works, and the whole idea with large language model is that it has this attention function to it where it can keep the entire string of the sentence in its attention at the entire time to then be able to better make a prediction in terms of what word comes next. So they created a certain model structure that had this attention feature built into it, just like the models that I build, and we'll get to some of the components, are particularly looking for and constrained and are built to understand the underlying dynamics that are at play. And since Ty Keynes and Steve Keen have done the heavy lifting of understanding that really the economy is just one massive systems dynamic system, all being driven by certain differential equations, then you can effectively construct a deep learning model to learn those equations of nature, if you will, and have a model that's built to be sensitive to that based on the features you've engineered, and then give you the output that you're looking for. So the next question you had was, you're selecting inputs according to the theory. That's fine, but when I look at your inputs, these aren't things that only MMT would say. Okay, that's good. And then, so he wants to understand what feature engineering is. And then he had one other point here that was worth making, but I can't find it now. Oh, he added it to this. Oh yeah, and the model's not causal. Okay. Yeah, really, let's do this, actually. I'm going to change gears and just kind of go over exactly what this model is. I was a little, I was going over this in prep. I can't believe I gave out some of the things that I did in this tweet. in reality, I gave out a little bit more information, and I think in retrospect, I should have. This tweet right here, just as like a proof of concept, and this is more than a year ago now. Yeah, a year and a half ago when I was ready to kind of produce the first deep learning model that was going to be MMT informed. Again, it's just a simple proof of concept to see if it can even work, right? Like, is there any juice to squeeze out of what it is that I'm giving this thing? That's what this is for. It's far from the model that we actually use that is deep MMT. The whole point was, can you build something like this and get anything out of the data? And so the reason I say that is I actually trained this thing on the part that's on the right here. That's why it perfectly fits. And the prediction is what's on the left. And the reason for this is I knew the COVID shock was really going to throw off the prediction. And so I didn't want it to have to deal with the COVID shock in terms of prediction. And what you end up finding is it does really understand what the unemployment rate is going to do given the various flows. So I was obviously very impressed with what this thing was able to come up with in real time for predicting the actual unemployment number based on what really is just the kind of the core MMT flows, which are going to be the sectoral balances, the main sectoral balances. So this would be the features, and then when I say engineering features, what you really are doing when you're engineering features is you can just throw into a deep learning model government spending, right? But that might not actually have the most amount of information in it that the model can learn from, right? So something simple that you might want to do is you might want to do maybe just the percent change year over year, right, of government spending. Maybe not the deficit of government spending, year over year change of government spending. That might actually be a better feature to throw in there because the model might be able to understand some sort of dynamic at play once you show it to it in a year-over-year change, right? So it would just be an example of a way to begin to engineer features. And there are a plethora of ways to engineer features. You can do things like seasonality deconstruction, right? You can do, which would take out the seasonality of a feature. You can do all sorts of different style of models that can take your feature and try and just get the core essence of that data to then feed to the model. That might make the model a little bit more tuned to what it is that's actually driving that so that it can learn that underlying function from the model. Now, here's the thing that I was a little surprised that I gave out to validate this and to show that this is in fact a deep learning model, not just some stupid bot. This was the actual structure that I used of the deep learning model itself. It's an LSTM model. You can see the total parameters that are in this thing, the various layers, that it's a deep learning model that feeds into a dense layer. It's a linear regression model is the output. So it was not just a stupid bot. I even shared the features and how I engineered them and then showed that ultimately the model was able to learn. So the point is, this is legit MMT informed deep learning model, not just a simple bot. And more importantly, it shows this sort of stuff can be done and is applicable and predictive of the current environment that we're in. And this is what I want to see. This is always this, to me, this is the standard that I would like to see that either proves or disproves the outcome. Because you can feed any data you want into this thing. And I did. Actually, what I did is I took a handful of features from weather data and fed those into the exact same model. And this is what you would expect if there's no information in there. If there's no juice to squeeze out of the information, you'd expect the prediction to just be flat, which is exactly what we saw, right? That when you give it information when you give it data that has no information in it to correlate to, or that is predictive, that is forecastable, that it's just going to create a regression that is sideways. And this could have been the outcome. And if it was the outcome, I got to go back to the drawing board, right? I missed something. Right. But obviously we didn't, and the rest is history. So, Per, if you're watching, I can help you, man. We can start the process, and I'd be glad to share this sort of stuff. I mean, you have academic resources that I don't have. You got a bunch of students that I'm sure would actually enjoy this sort of stuff, and could start to dig into it. And I could certainly help you down the path.
Maybe he'll take you up on that, Doug. But he would have to admit to watching your stream first.
Oh, that's a really good point. He's one of the closet viewers. He's the one that's been just smashing that like button this entire time. Must be, huh? All right, man. Let's do this. Let's go over some questions real quick, and then we'll wrap up the stream tonight. First question I'm seeing here. Does Adam have special hair products he uses? If so, are they affordable for a man on a shoebox budget?
Ty, I'll send you the link privately. It's a secret.
You know the secret would be safe with me. Question. History would tell us that it takes time for surpluses to trickle through the stock market. How can we use credit cycle to better time the top? I'm going to assume you mean surpluses as in it takes time for the surplus. By that I mean it takes time for the surplus to actually put pressure on the private sector and the endogenous cycle to then, in other words, there's a lag from the time we get into a surplus to the time we actually have a recession.
Right.
Which is a very good question, Dan. I have an answer. Adam, do you have a thought? I mean, I'll fire away if.
Doug, why don't you start and I'll follow up if I have any thoughts.
Okay. Very good question. I agree, Dan. One of the reasons I was building that whole tax project that we've been talking about in weeks past here has been because I have been trying to create a tool that can better understand the credit cycle. And there are some really easy ways that you could just come up with the general gist of the credit cycle. I mean, it seems to be like a cycle of nature. I think I saw like you can apply like a Fourier transformer to the data and like get, I think it's like a 65-month cycle out of it or something like that, from peak to peak or trough to trough. But the question is, can you build a model that just is better attuned to the data that's coming in to better time the certain cycles that do take place in the credit world? And yes, I think that's correct. I think the other aspect to this, and maybe I'm getting in front of where Adam would go with this, but there does seem to be this kind of almost macro leverage ratio of government spending to. I'll let you take it if that's where you were headed. I'll let you take that point.
Well, I was just gonna say, I actually looked this up today. I would just be looking at like debt service levels as a percentage of income. So like, I don't know what point is what the point is that is too much private debt for the private sector to bear, because it also depends on, what is the government doing on the fiscal side to support incomes. So like, if that ratio gets to a certain point, maybe the government starts running a larger deficit or even shrinks the surplus. Is that income enough to support the private sector debt service? So I don't know what the magic number is, but I think you'd have to look back into the data and try to determine something.
I think the best way to predict it is just to build a model that's attuned to the underlying function that's causing it. And that's my goal. So that means there's no magic number per se. And I think that's a difficult part. We just don't know what that magic number is. But I do think we can get enough of a heads up to understand when that inflection point would likely be happening.
Right.
And I'll tell you, the worst of it will likely come after April or after October. Or after April or after September, because those are the two biggest tax strains that seem to have the most impact on asset prices throughout the year. And certainly 2008, when we had the worst of it, that was the two kind of shocks to the system, April and or kind of May and October, April and October. So,
and oil, can't forget oil.
Yeah, the input that is oil. Great question. That is part of the bigger process that we're trying to build here, because I absolutely agree. I know, because we have the whole MMT thing and we're trying to really drive home the point of what government spending is, the implications of that on the private sector and everything. But in terms of the trading aspect of it, or the longer term investing aspect, and certainly the timing that I personally use, the implication of the credit cycle is just as much, if not more, important to understand for those sort of decisions. So it's a nut I've got to crack, to put it that way, if we really want these models to be as absolutely powerful as they can be. All right. Question: why do economists not believe that customers with money to burn won't spur business to make more stuff? It's a very good question. I have no answer as to why they don't think rich people will spend their money.
Yeah, I don't have a great answer. I mean, I know that, you know, when we talk about the regressive nature of the rate increases and how that's just like direct fiscal support to people who already have money, one of the arguments is, you know, the marginal propensity to consume. So this idea that, like, you know, if someone who's making $10 million a year suddenly has some extra money to spend, it's not going to change their spending habits that much, versus someone who's making $20,000 a year has extra money to spend, they'll likely spend all that money. So like that is one legitimate argument, I think. But overall, like, you know, I can't think of another context where you would say, hey, the government, you know, went from $500 billion a year in spending on X to 1.25 or 1.5 trillion a year, you know, so like a net addition of $1 trillion. I can't think of another context where economists wouldn't find that stimulative, other than the rate hikes. Like, for some reason, they just ignore that type of spending. And I don't have a great explanation for you other than the MPC thing.
Which I still don't even get. Let's say every person that makes more than paycheck to paycheck, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's just, for the sake of the argument, paycheck to paycheck starts at, this is probably way higher. I'm
Yeah.
going to offend people, but for the sake of the argument, paycheck to paycheck starts at $100,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everyone under $100,000 is living paycheck to paycheck. Everyone over $100,000 is able to save any addition that they have, right? Any additional income, and they're going to save every penny of it. I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yep.
Right. What does that mean then? If they save it as cash,
Mm-hmm.
then they're getting whatever the savings rate is in their savings account, which is going to be close to 5%, 4%, 5%, right? So there's a pass through to begin with. So I guess in that instance, that's just ballooning their savings account.
Yeah.
Does that benefit the bank at all to have that deposit? Probably not.
No, because someone will have the deposit.
Yeah, someone will have the deposit. I guess the only benefit to the bank is at 0% interest rates, they're not making any spread on the money that they're getting from the deposits.
Yeah,
from the Fed, which would be reserves.
Right.
Versus there's now a spread, but most of that is going to be a pass through at this point. There's a lag. Other people, I guess, again, assuming they're not going to consume, might buy bonds.
Yep.
Or just invest in equities.
Yeah.
Real estate.
Or art. Or art. You know, whatever asset class you want to.
Yep. Yeah. So at the very least, assuming some of that rolls over into the ability now for the private sector to increase its own balance sheets.
Yep.
Which allows them to create new investment, right? Like,
yep.
And I think we're seeing this in these companies that have massive cash hoards that are now earning 5.5% a year on these cash hoards of like $1 trillion, whatever amount of cash they have.
Yep.
I think my point is, even if there's no consumption, there is a channel and a pathway to trickle down.
Right. Well, totally. I just read, there was some chart today. You know, there's basically no end in sight to corporate earnings upside. So like you can just, it is, the way I think about it now is it's just like a general wealth effect, right? It's like that money is going somewhere, whether it's deposited or whether it's used to buy stocks or whether it's spent, on consumption, investment, whatever, like the money is still in the system. And yeah, it's like as an individual, your consumption may not change because you're earning 5% in your cash, but like the money is still somewhere, and that I think will have a broader effect. And I think that's what we're seeing play out,
And I think short of saving every dollar as a deposit, which
Yeah.
what's deposit insurance stop at now?
I think 250,000.
Okay, right. So anything over 250,000 is not being held as a deposit directly at this point for someone's personal.
Well, but that's only that's only per account.
Per account. Okay. So you can split that up. I guess what I'm trying to say is I find it hard to believe. The only way this wouldn't be directly beneficial to the private sector balance sheet is if everyone was holding every dollar as a deposit.
Right.
Any other activity has a knock-on effect that is that will find its way to supporting economic activity in one way or another.
Right. Like the billionaire doesn't have to go buy more ice cream cones for the economy to stimulate the economy.
To have his cut of the balance sheet stimulate the economy. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's his face in Jurassic Park? What's the name that
Jeff Goldblum?
Thank you.
I knew you were thinking of Jeff Goldblum.
Life finds a way, and economic activity finds a way, man. There was a great interview. If you haven't listened to it yet, you need to listen to it. And it was what was his name? Mark Dow on what was the name of the podcast? Here we go. The Forward Guidance, Jack Farley. Just a phenomenal podcast. This is so good. If you only have 12 and a half minutes, listen to the first 12 and a half minutes of this tonight before you go to bed. It is chef's kiss over and over. And I mean, his point, and I've driven home this point so many times, which is economic activity at the end of the day is driven by, this is gonna be so sexist, but it's like driven by the wife wanting something new. It is so true that if you're expecting a baby or you've got a new little one and you need the bigger house. Like that is just how the economy works, is people grow older and they want more things and they want their lives to look a certain way. And there's just no stopping that reality. Like when the wife says, hey, Doug, you're making more money, let's go get bigger things, that happens. Or the discussion is, I'll take the wife out of this, things are just more expensive. I'm going to go to my employer and say, give me a raise or I'm looking elsewhere. And my point has always been, when that conversation happens, if the interest income wasn't coming through, then I would agree that there's no more money there. But the money is there now.
Right.
Even if it's in the hands of the billionaires, it's there.
Yeah.
And either one, the private sector just now has the capacity to leverage, or it's just a direct transfer that the billionaire knows that his own assets are going to collapse, that his business is going to collapse if he doesn't pay the people that are running his business more. So like there's just this, this is part of the discussion and part of the thing I was trying to bring up in our podcast with David Andolfata, is it's like there seems to be in their model at some point this assumption that just capitalism ceases to exist with a marginal propensity to save. And I don't see that happening. You wouldn't be the one that's like, yeah, sorry, employee that actually brings the vast majority of the output in this company, I'm just going to go ahead and let you go elsewhere because I'm really happy that all my assets are going up. That's just not how that would work. And so I don't know why they missed that. I asked one. I asked a former Fed economist that, and I was not given, well, you can listen to the answer over at appliedmmt.com/podcast, or maybe it's podcast. Yeah. Podcast. Yeah. If you head on over to podcast.appliedmmt.com, you can listen to the conversation that we had and see if that answer is sufficient to you. Anyway, that's my point. I don't know if you have anything else to build onto that.
No, I think I really just think it's they heavily lean on this idea of marginal propensity to consume, and yeah, I mean that's not to say that like obviously there are winners and losers from the rate hikes, but if the expectation like is that the income will be there and what's providing the income is the government deficit or in this case the interest rates which contribute to the government deficit, the income is there, and like that's the bottom line is the income is there.
Yep.
And that's what keeps the whole thing going.
It was actually one of the questions that came up. We're going to be we got to kind of wrap things up here pretty soon. One of the questions that came up that I excuse me, that I thought, there were two questions that I kind of wanted to riff on stream, and I'll riff on one of those real quick right now. And this came up in other debates as well, but I was just pointing out one of the many tweets that MMT tells you 16 months ahead of the mainstream what's about to happen. We've been seeing a lot of, oh my God, maybe this higher interest rate thing is actually stimulative. And I'm not saying we told you this was going to happen, but what I'm saying is we told you this was going to happen. And the response was, and I got to respond to you, Tim, if you're watching. I'll get back with you soon. I don't think that interest payments on accumulated savings is the reason for the stronger demand we've seen. Why not assume demand came from higher income? I agree the demand came from higher income. The question is, where did that income come from?
Right.
And
right.
My
that's actually
the source of the income. Yeah, we track it back
yes.
to the source.
Yes, and that's Bob Elliott, Bob E Unlimited made the same point. If anyone saw Mosler's, he did an interview with Real Vision recently, and off the bat, the interviewer asks Mosler, he says, we recently had Bob E Unlimited on. I forget the guy, Bob Elliott, is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
And Bob, made the point that, in his view, it wasn't the government spending that has created this boom. It was actually income growth in the private sector. And Mosler responds and he says, yeah, but like the government is the source of the the income growth. And that is the point. And that is what like, so many people have a hard time wrapping their head around is the government's the source of the dollars to begin with, or they're created endogenously by government charter. But in order for wages to grow, that money that income to the private sector must be coming from somewhere. Right. And like, it seems like MMT is the only school that gets that.
There are only two sources that can drive income growth at an aggregate level.
Right.
Endogenous source or government spending. The only two places it can come from. Everything else that it could come from, any other place you could find, would be derivative of those two sources. Which is why, a lot of people say, as one guy was saying, you're not doing anything new, and there are other people who follow flows. Yeah, the vast majority of people are following monetary flows, which are meaningless and point to nothing. The only flows that matter are not the monetary. By monetary flows, I mean what the Fed is doing with its balance sheet and whatnot. If you guys are following that, and that is the main thing you're following to try and understand how markets are working, and you're not figuring it out, it's because all the Fed is doing is they're just trying to make sure things clear. That's all they're really caring about. In the grand scheme of things, what they're trying to do with all the operations they have is just to make sure that 2008 doesn't happen again from a lockup standpoint, right? They know they know they can't get in front or completely stop any sort of recession or anything like that. What they just want is 2008 doesn't happen again, where the complete financial sector shuts down, and a lot of that is by just facilitating various monetary operations to allow the books to clear at the end of each night. The most important flows are going to be watching what those bank flows are doing, endogenous money creation, and what the fiscal is doing. And as far as I'm aware, very few people have built any sort of models that are based on those as first principles and then build up. And that's kind of what we're doing here. So I'm going to finish with this one last question, then we're going to wrap it up. When can I buy? When can I go long again? When's the bottom coming in? We're close. We're close, Ty. We're close, I think. I'm not quite sold yet on today's bounce. Give it a day or two, maybe we'll be sold. But I do think we're close, and I do think at the end of the day, this is still just a pause in a larger, longer term rally, as opposed to a complete collapse here of any sorts. But things could still get dicey. We're far from out of the woodwork yet. Historically, May is a choppy month, and we could easily end up seeing that play out going forward. So stay tuned on that call. At this point, I'm still I'm still, I'm still moderately concerned here, and would remain not surprised if we get further downside going forward. But certainly, we've seen the big hit like we were expecting. Not entirely convinced that it's not over yet, but it could. But I'm at least to the point where I could say it could be. We just need to get the confirmation that the flows are kicking in and ready to kind of suppress volatility and support the rally once again. So that is that's kind of where I'm at. But stay tuned on that one. That's what we got for tonight, crew. Thanks for tuning in. Adam, thanks for dropping on stream. I apologize. I finally figured out, Adam, you didn't know this, but you'd been echoing, and it was 100% my fault. But we figured it out. All right, stream. Until next time, good trading, and we'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.
See you guys. I can. I can't see you.